This episode is sponsored by JDAQA Software Testing, your scalable solution for manual, automated, security, and performance testing. Check us out at jdaqa.com. And with that, let's get on with the show.
This is The First Customer, hosted by Jay Agnew.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the First Customer Podcast. My name is Jay Agnew. Today, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Ryan Rosett. He's the CEO and founder of Credibly, based in Detroit, I think. Ryan, how are you, buddy?
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, doing great. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Are you in Detroit?
I am outside of Detroit, but
Okay.
within 15-minute drive, so close enough.
Okay. What's the vibe in Detroit now? Is it, it obviously was like, kind of a little sketchy there for a while, but I've heard it's getting nicer or better, or is that kind of how people feel around there?
Yes, I would agree with that. It had a really good momentum going into COVID, and then sort of when COVID hit, the office market sort of shut down. It affected the retail, but all in all, I'd say Detroit has really sort of come back in a big way. Thanks to a big part, from the founder of Rocket Mortgage. He's invested heavily in downtown Detroit, and so it's made a huge difference.
Awesome. All right. So where did you grow up? Did you grow up in Detroit, and did it have an impact on you being an entrepreneur?
It did. I mean, I grew up in a family my dad was an entrepreneur. He owned a number of dry cleaners. So I just always, that was part of my life growing up, just the ebbs and flows of small businesses and going to work for him and working alongside him, for a period of time. But yeah, it was something it was sort of ingrained in me.
What do you think the biggest thing that you do now you could kind of trace back to some of the stuff he was doing?
That's a good question. I mean, I would just say, he was good at managing a lot of different aspects of the business. I think what I did differently maybe than he did was he would do it all. And think I realized sort of early in my career that I can't be good at everything. Even I could be okay at a lot of things, but having specialists is, sort of changed my way of doing business or the way I look at business. And having people that are really good at what they do is so much better than, me trying to muddle through something, even though it took a while for me to get there from a delegation standpoint.
How do you identify those things today? Like if something you're doing and you're like mid thing and you're like, oh shit, I should probably not be doing this. Like how do you kind of identify those things that you should hand off to somebody else even today?
Well, if I feel like I'm doing something and I don't feel like it's going as well as it should or as well as like I would expect, even if it's me doing it, some people don't like having smarter people around them. I prefer having really smart people sort of around me and making decisions, whether they be right or wrong, but just having a conviction, thinking it through, articulating sort of a strategy as it relates to something, and then doing it. And one thing I've also learned over the years is just like having mistakes is important, making mistakes is important, having small failures is the best learning experience you could possibly go through, just because you then realize quickly what it was that you did wrong, and you hopefully don't repeat that.
Mm-hmm. Love that. What's your background in before you ran the company?
So I have a business partner. Both of us are lawyers by education. I never practiced law. My partner did practice law for a period of time. I started a couple businesses. One I started when I was in law school. It was a coffee shop. I went to school in Ann Arbor. I went to University of Michigan, and there was like 18 coffee shops. And then I went to law school in Detroit, and I lived in a town called Birmingham, Michigan, which is just outside of Detroit, and there were no coffee shops. And so I, in my infinite wisdom, said, well, I'm going to build one, and this is like, I don't want to say predates Starbucks, but Starbucks had like, I think 150 stores at the time. And it was largely in Seattle. And so it was like a different time for the coffee house business. And it was really successful, but I learned I didn't love retail. So like, in my life, you learn things, and I was working a lot and going to law school, and then I sold my interest in that business. And then I did another business that wasn't successful, another great learning experience, but it was a beer of the month club. It was like when microbrews started getting, sort of hot. And it was realizing quickly that it turned into a Christmas gift mostly. And that's what it was. It was a completely seasonal business. So you had to plan your cash flow around that. And then I was in real estate development for 15 years. And then I was in short term bridge lending backed by commercial real estate. And then I've been in this business for 15 years. So I just summed up my whole life
I mean,
in
that was
three
quick.
minutes.
That was
Yeah.
good. Hats off to the quickness. How much is a coffee shop? I mean, I mean, you can kind of extrapolate based on inflation and other things, but just in general, how much does a coffee shop bring in per year? Just like a regular
Um,
coffee shop you see downtown somewhere.
yeah. So, like, keep in mind, I'm going back to 1993.
Sure, sure. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So it's not adjusted. We were doing on an average day, we were bringing in, $2,000 to $2,500 in revenue. And then, like, on the
Mhm.
weekends, we would do up to 4,000. So,
Okay.
just as like, just over probably, a million, 2 million, three revenue type business,
Okay.
total revenue.
Yeah, because I always see the all the brick and mortars I see today, and just like as much as I love business stuff so much, and I always just wonder like how are they staying afloat with like all the stuff you have to pay for and rent and people and machines and technology and blah 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 blah. Even though a coffee shop these days, I would have to I mean, your operating expenses have to be pretty high, right? I mean, there's a lot of things to just even to be in a building somewhere is like a lot, and
And
rent's
and
expensive and
exactly.
insurance and
And
everything else.
you got it. And so in that type of business, I mean, in a lot of businesses, location's everything, especially retail.
Hmm.
Certain
Yep.
locations, if you're a wholesaler, who cares where you're located? But like on a retail basis, I would just say, you had to have like the prime location. We were right next to a movie theater in this downtown location, and we needed some parking. And you have to think about all this AM traffic versus PM traffic, the way that people like driving patterns work, just because you
Mm,
want to be on the right side of the road as, if people
mm,
are commuting to work and they're getting a cup of coffee. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things. And then do you think about the store design and, you want them to walk past the pastry case. So hopefully you can upsell them on some, like all these like little
mhm,
things you have to sort of think through as you're designing it. But you are correct. The expenses associated with running a small business is expensive. And, understanding that and understanding whether it be seasonality or the ebbs and flows of the cash flow is vital to a small business. And, that's what, and I'm sure we'll get there, but that's what we exactly do today at Credibly is, kind of provide this working capital solution for small businesses. And it's not just the unexpected, it's like when they expect it. They could be in this
mhm.
business for 5, 10 years and say, hey, we're going into a slower season. I need to put a little bit of cash in my bank account so that I can weather, colder months of the year.
That makes a lot of sense, and that's a perfect segue into Credibly. Why did you start it? When did you start it? Just kinda give me the genesis of where it came from.
Yep. So I mentioned I was in for about 3 years. I was doing bridge loans backed by commercial real estate that were income producing, and we were lending. And this is going back to the Great Recession. So call it 2007 to 2010. We were lending at a loan to value. So if the building's worth 2 million, we would lend up to $1 million. And what we were doing is doing discounted payoffs to banks. So banks were like sort of purging their assets because they were over leveraged. The borrower or the developer would come to us, seek money, and we would provide sort of a bridge capital loan secured by the real estate. I then came across this business, which was at the time it was a merchant cash advance business. And it was interesting to me because I had a deep understanding of small businesses. Two, we were coming out of this, whether it was a double dip recession or the Great Recession, we were like sort of in unknown territory. And banks notoriously do not lend during uncertainty. So, they are very patient and they want to make sure that they get paid back. So there was a real credit crunch for small businesses. And so we opened it up. My partner has a wholesale mortgage background experience. So he brought like more underwriting, and I was bringing more on the origination side, revenue creation, and technology. And we just started doing it. And like when we did it, we were doing everything. We were originating, we were underwriting, we were doing portfolio management. If a deal went into collections, we would be the collectors. So like, there wasn't a part of the business that we didn't touch when we started. And then as we started to grow, we brought on more, like I discussed before, like specialists that were really good at what they did. and brought an expertise that we didn't bring to the business, which, really sort of made us more professional.
I mean, you could argue that, you know, I'm not going to say you guys are trying to outsmart the banks, but there was like a level of risk that you guys are willing to take that they weren't. Is that kind of why the business took off when it did?
And it's still the same. So it's like all we're doing is picking off a very small segment of the bank's business. We don't do
Mm-hmm.
treasury, we don't do bank accounts. All we're doing is small business lending. And we picked something that, bluntly, like, we don't think banks are very good at. And I'll tell you why, is because like our average loan size is around $65,000. Banks, if you think about a bank lending, going through the entire process to originate a $65,000 loan, which could take 2, 3 months, there's just no money in it. Banks just don't have the ability to underwrite the file and make it a profitable relationship. So, where we excel is that when somebody makes an application to us, we typically can give an approval within 2 hours and fund same day. So, and then you compare that experience to a bank where you're supplying all types of documentation. It could take 60 to 90 days and you may get rejected. So, after that period of time. So, like, yes, we get financed through banks, okay? And we do asset-backed securitizations. So, the cost of capital we are going to be more expensive than a bank. That being said, the certainty that comes along with our approval
Hmm.
is there. So if somebody has an opportunity and they can say, hey, credibly, I need $100,000 and I can buy something at a discount where I can make good profit or whatever the case may be, that's a great use of our capital. So in today's world where banks are, saying no or are being a little bit more risk adverse, we take risks. That's our business. And the way we price a certain deal is if you're a doctor, you've been in business for 20 years, you're going to get much better pricing than if you're, somebody who opened an ice cream store 6 months ago. It's not to say that we won't give you an offer if you open an ice cream 6 months ago. It's that somebody who has established business, their cash flow is pretty steady. And again, we look at the credit profile of the customer, but it's not a majority of it's probably 30, 40% of what we do. We're really just looking at cash
Mm-hmm.
flow. So we look at the cash flow, the bank statements, and make a determination as to like what a small business can afford. And we want to put the business in a good position where they can pay us back and still operate their business with like ample cash
I
flow.
mean, there's just a giant risk when you guys started that like people don't pay you back and you guys are screwed. Like, I mean, that's the biggest risk in a business like that for you guys, right?
Absolutely. So, I mean, and so we are unsecured. I mean, there is a personal guarantee on our loan documents. And, if we do offer two products, we offer a merchant cash advance and a loan product. Majority of what we do are loans, but the merchant cash advance has a springing personal guarantee. So, like, if somebody does fraud on us, there is a personal guarantee and their signature
Hmm.
matters. But if you borrow from us and you legitimately go out of business, that's on us. That's like, it's not something we
Hmm.
pursue. So that's our
And
underwriting.
how are you guys able to do what you can do that the banks can't? Like, is it just they're just too big and they have too much overhead and it's just not worth it for them to do those smaller loans? Why can you guys do it and they can't?
That's a good question. It's not that they can't. They can. They
Hmm.
choose not to for
Mm-hmm.
some reason. So we're using, a ton of alternative data, machine learning. We're using generative AI in our decision making process. There's a number of like sort of soft data information that we're able to extract, even like the age of the email and like when something was created on a website and Secretary of State polls and this is all like instant. This isn't something that we're having somebody pull in. It's all through
Mm-hmm.
automation. It all gives us the information in real time. And we create our own proprietary score of the customer, which has a probability of default. And then we make an offer to the
Hmm.
customer that is risk adjusted. So that's really how we operate. We take risks. We're in the business of taking risks, but we do see thousands of applications on a daily basis, and so
Hmm.
we have to kind of sort through them and make a determination as to which ones we're making offers on, and all within this like sort of service level of what we shoot for is like a 2 hour kind of turn time.
So who was your first customer and how did you get them?
And it's fun. It's a good question. There was a restaurant not far from us, and it was called Dominic's, and it's an Italian restaurant. My partner and I, we reviewed the application. We were, it's not like we had we had plenty of time because it was our first deal, and we were being very prudent in terms of how we were going to deploy this $15,000
Mm-hmm.
loan. Okay, but to us, it was still like important. And we went and visited him, and the guy at the end of like sitting with him for an hour said, "Listen, this is absurd. I'm asking for $15,000. Like, you guys are spending an hour with me." And we proceeded, we funded him, but that was like the first one. And we funded him multiple times since then. But it was, like everything, it's a learning curve, and we learned a lot during that process. But that was our first
I think
customer.
there has to be an overwhelming majority of Italian restaurants named Dominic's just across the United States. I feel like there's a Dominic's everywhere.
Yes,
There's always a Dominic's. There's always at least a
yes,
couple,
that's
and
right.
even in your little town, you'll find a
Yes,
Dominic's. That's good. I like that. All right. Well, who's your customer
yeah.
today as opposed to back then, and how's that kind of changed over time?
So, I would say we started doing mostly what was called split processing. So we would look at their credit card receipts, and then we would take a portion of their credit card receivables and it would pay us back automatically. Now we rarely do that. It's all we provide the capital, and then we do like a daily or weekly ACH is how we get paid. And our customer profile, I want to say there's over 300 different SIC codes that we lend into. So basically, like any type of business, we probably have funded. The ones we don't fund, it's very few, but like adult entertainment, gambling, and it's more dictated by our banks
Hmm,
than us. So cannabis, just the things that are, I would say, headline risk
sure.
issues, we stay clear of. But like, those three industries, and there might be a couple more. And the interesting thing about our business also is that our business, where like, for example, trucking, okay, like, so, we lend to logistics. It in certain times it does very well, and it's a very cyclical business, and other times it
Hmm.
doesn't do well. So we have the ability to where we're always checking where our portfolio updates are daily. We're constantly tweaking like what we feel is the right amount of risk based on industry, modifying that. So it's an evolving process. And if there's a natural disaster, we may require a site inspection, which we do. It's a very simple process. It's an online, we send a link to the person's cell phone. It launches their cell phone or their camera. They take a few pictures, just making sure that there's no damages to the location, before we fund it. So like, we have a lot of protections built in just because we want to ensure that if we're funding a business in California where there's wildfires, we want to make sure that their business isn't
Hmm.
burned down. And, so those are things that we do, and we can implement in minutes notice and make changes within our system.
What's the biggest loan you guys have ever given out?
600,000, that's kind of where we
Okay.
cap out. So yeah, I think that, anything over 600,000 largely probably should go to
Okay.
a bank, just because it becomes expensive. And, it's not to say that we don't do them, but we do them. But, and I would say like our sweet spot is sort of anywhere up to 400,000, is really fast. And, anything, 4 to 600,000, obviously it's meaningful money to
Hmm.
anyone that it requires a fair amount of due
If you
diligence.
serve so many different types of businesses, how do you, especially the last 5 to 10 years, it's just been like niche down, niche down, niche down. I actually hate the word niche down or term niche down at this point, but how do you stay focused with your sales and marketing if you're so spread out, as far as actual vertical that your customers are coming from? And I get that most they're just under this small business umbrella, so you can kind of target them under that. But like, how are you paying any more attention to other types? That you kind of alluded to it a little bit there with the trucking and logistics thing. To be, maybe it's cyclical, maybe it's seasonal, whatever. Are you doing anything to kind of focus in on any one group or subset of that big giant small business pie that's out there? How are you guys focusing on any individuals or individual market?
Yeah. So like any, so we have a fairly robust marketing team, and we're doing a ton of digital marketing. So, certain keywords, that are larger customers for us, like for example, in eating establishments, that's I don't want to say it's like, probably 8% of our portfolio is like some form of restaurant or eating
Mm-hmm.
establishment. So like we would market to that customer, recognizing that's a customer that's generally going to be underbanked and is somebody that we've done quite well with, and and is accustomed to using alternative financing sources to fund their
Mm.
working capital. So that's an example. So like our marketing team will channel certain industries that in certain times. So, like tax season, for example, like we may, where there's taxes due, and we know certain businesses that may have like, certain taxes that are due. I mean, all businesses have taxes due generally, but like, where there's opportunity. And again, the way we look at it is like, their cash flow is like an asset that they can leverage, and that's what we're providing leverage on, is their cash flow, and how they use their capital is up to them. Like we're not tracking per se how they use it. How would we prefer they use it? We prefer that they used it to enhance their business. But if they were paying a tax bill, I think there's an argument to be made that's a pretty good use of capital, because like who would you rather owe money to, Credibly or the
Right.
government? I would
Right.
say Credibly. So I mean that's just an example, but things come up, and if there's somebody who has we've seen bank statements, and you're seeing 1,000 DraftKings kind of polls on their bank statement. It gets that automated. It's just an automated
Mm.
decline. So that they have a gambling sort of issue that they're running through their
Mm-hmm.
business, and like so there's certain things like in our algorithm that will pull, and we're just not interested in lending money to a customer
Mm.
like that. So, I mean, and when I say like, I just raised two things, but there's hundreds of nuances that we have built into our
Okay.
models.
Love that. All right. I have one final question for you. This is not about Credibly. It's not about business. It's not about, anything entrepreneurship related. I'm curious, just Ryan being Ryan, if you could do anything on earth and you knew you wouldn't fail, what would it be?
If I could do anything on earth and I knew I wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
fail, what would I
What would you
be?
do? Let's
Wow.
see. I know when people say it
Um,
back to me, it's a great stall tactic because it's my favorite question to ask that nobody has an answer for.
it's a
I
great
love it.
question. Okay, so here's what I'd say, and I've tried it and I'm not good at it, but I would love to be, I love the time to do it. I would love to surf. I
There you
love
go.
the water. So I can't say I'm good at it because I've only done it once and I kind of sucked. But if I had an opportunity to like redo, I think surfing would be like high
There
on
you
my
go.
list of
Look,
things to
and,
do.
and in this example, you couldn't fail. You would be Kelly Slater or whoever the hell is the popular surfer. I don't know any other surfers
Right.
besides.
In my
Yeah, I
own
don't know any
mind.
other surfers
Right.
besides him. But awesome. Well, Ryan,
Right.
you're great. I love kind of the genesis. I think there was some stuff people can pull out there. If people want to reach out to you about anything they heard directly, how do they do that?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously there's, you can find us at credibly.com. If anyone is interested in having a question with me, I'm generally available. My email is Ryan at credibly.com.
Perfect. All right, man. Well, you're awesome. I'll give you a go Lions. Is that what you guys say over there? What do you say? Is that like your chant? We say go Birds, go
Go
Lions.
Lions. There's
There's
a
a roar. All right.
roar.
I won't ask you to
So,
do the roar today,
like,
but I wish you guys
yeah,
luck until you
thanks.
face the Eagles. And other than that, man, have a great
Yeah.
rest of your day. Have a good week, and we'll talk to you soon. All right.
Okay, thanks,
Thanks,
Ray. I
Ryan. See you,
appreciate
brother.
it.